On a cold December night in 1968, just days before Christmas, a quiet stretch of road in Northern California would become the setting for one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, had driven out to Lake Herman Road, a secluded lover's lane on the outskirts of Vallejo. They were young, innocent, and in love, and completely unaware that they were about to become the first known victims of a man who would later call himself the Zodiac. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in American history. His murders weren't just brutal. They were theatrical, almost ritualistic. He didn't just kill, he taunted, sending letters and ciphers to newspapers, daring police to catch him, mocking the families of victims, and ensuring his shadow loomed larger than life. Tonight, we unravel his story, from the first shot fired on that cold December night, through the chilling letters, the ciphers that still remain unsolved, and the decades of investigation that have failed to unmask the man who terrorized California. December 20th, 1968. Vallejo, California. 17-year-old David Faraday had borrowed his mother's Rambler station wagon. With him was his girlfriend, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. It was their very first date. They went to a friend's house, attended a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, and then decided to drive out toward Lake Herman Road, a known spot where young couples would park to talk, kiss, and steal a few private moments away from watchful parents. It was around 11 p.m. when they pulled into the gravel turnout. The night was silent, the temperature dropping. From where they sat, they could see nothing but the empty road stretching into darkness. What they didn't know was that someone had been watching. A vehicle pulled up behind them. Investigators would later believe it was a light-colored car, perhaps a Chevrolet. The driver stepped out, walked toward the Rambler, and within seconds the night exploded with violence. A bullet tore through the window of the Rambler. David was shot in the head at point-blank range. Betty Lou screamed and bolted from the car, running into the darkness, desperate to escape. But she didn't get far. 5 shots echoed into the night, each one striking her in the back. She collapsed only 28 feet from the car, lifeless in the dirt. By the time passers-by found the scene, the shooter was long gone. David was still clinging to life, but died en route to the hospital. Betty Lou was already gone. No fingerprints, no shell casings, no eyewitnesses, just 2 teenagers gunned down without reason. At first, authorities treated it as a lover's lane tragedy, perhaps a jealous ex-boyfriend or a crime of passion. They had no idea this was just the beginning. For 7 months, there was nothing. No suspect, no leads, no explanation for why 2 innocent teenagers had been executed on a lonely road. But then, on the 4th of July, 1969, the killer struck again. This time, he wouldn't just leave behind bodies. He would leave behind his name. It was Independence Day. Fireworks lit up the skies across Vallejo, and people were out celebrating late into the night. At Blue Rock Springs Park, another secluded lover's lane, a 22-year-old woman named Darlene Farron had parked her car with a friend, 19-year-old Mike Majo. Darlene was married, but she and Mike were close, friends, maybe something more. As they sat talking, a car pulled in behind them. It was around midnight. The vehicle lingered, then drove off. Minutes later, it returned. This time, the driver got out. He carried a flashlight and a 9mm handgun. Without warning, he fired 5 shots into the car, hitting both Darlene and Mike. As they screamed in pain, the man turned to walk away, then suddenly came back and fired again. Darlene was hit 9 times. She wouldn't survive. Mike, despite being shot multiple times, somehow lived. And then, just 40 minutes later, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, chilling. "I want to report a double murder. If you'll go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The line clicked dead. This was no ordinary killer. This was a man who craved attention, who needed the world to know what he had done. And soon, he would make sure his name was remembered forever. 3 weeks later, on July 31st, 1969, 3 major newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald each received a letter. Each letter was nearly identical, written in a neat but unsettling hand. The writer claimed responsibility for both the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs attack. But he didn't just confess, he demanded attention. Each envelope contained a piece of a 408-character cryptogram, a cipher made up of strange symbols and letters. He demanded the papers print the cipher on their front pages. If they refused, he threatened to cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend. The newspapers published the ciphers. Panic swept the Bay Area, and for the first time, the public read the words of the man who would soon call himself the Zodiac. On August 1st, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald each received their piece of the cipher. The letters were short, chilling, and demanding. This is the murderer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, plus the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove this, I shall state some facts which only I plus the police know. Christmas, brand name of ammo Super X, 10 shots fired. Girl was wearing patterned slacks. Each letter contained details about the crimes that had never been released publicly. The killer was proving his identity, but more importantly, he was showing his appetite for control. He wanted the world to listen, and they did. The newspapers printed the letters, along with the cipher. Readers across California tried to solve it, tracing symbols, scribbling out possibilities. On August 8th, a week later, the puzzle was cracked, not by professional cryptographers, but by a schoolteacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty, from Salinas. When the 408-symbol cipher was decrypted, it revealed a chilling message. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. It rambled on, boasting about collecting slaves for the afterlife. It ended with a line that would become the Zodiac's calling card. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. No name, no clue to his true identity, just madness and a promise of more blood. 2 days later, on August 7th, before the cipher was even solved, the San Francisco Examiner received another letter. This time, it began with a phrase that would cement his legend. Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. And with those words, a killer named himself. The Zodiac. It wasn't just a name, it was a brand. A symbol of fear. He signed a letter with his iconic crosshair logo, a circle with a cross through it, like the sight of a rifle scope. Now, the killer wasn't just a shadow. He had an identity, a voice, a symbol, and he wasn't finished. September 27th, 1969. It was a warm afternoon at Lake Berryessa, northeast of Napa Valley. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard had spread out a blanket on the grass, relaxing by the water. It was an idyllic day. The lake shimmered in the sun, the trees whispered in the breeze, and the world seemed safe. Until they noticed a man watching them from a distance. At first, they thought little of it. People often wandered along the lakeshore. But this man, he didn't walk away. Instead, he grew closer. And as he approached, Brian and Cecilia realized he was wearing something out of a nightmare. The man wore a dark executioner-style hood, with sunglasses sewn into the fabric. His chest bore the white, circling cross symbol of a zodiac. In his hand, he carried a gun, and dangling from his belt a knife. The Zodiac announced that he had escaped from prison, that he needed money and a car to get to Mexico. His voice was calm, controlled. He ordered Cecilia to tie Brian up with pre-cut lengths of rope, then tied Cecilia himself. But what happened next destroyed any hope that this was a robbery. Without warning, the Zodiac pulled out his knife. Slowly, methodically, he plunged it into Brian 6 times. Then he turned on Cecilia, stabbing her 10 times in the back. As the couple writhed in pain, the Zodiac walked calmly back to Brian's car. Using a black marker, he scrawled a message on the door. Vallejo, December 20th, 68, July 4th, 69, September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife. He was keeping score, but he wasn't done. He drove to a nearby payphone in Napa and called police. His words were chillingly casual. "I want to report a murder." "No, a double murder. They're 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. I'm the one who did it." The line clicked dead. A fisherman found the victims hours later. Cecilia, barely clinging to life, managed to describe the attacker in detail. Brian survived as well. But Cecilia, after 2 days in the hospital, succumbed to her wounds. The Zodiac had escalated. Now it wasn't just shooting from the shadows. He had come in costume, face-to-face, stabbing his victims as if enacting some grotesque ritual. Just 2 weeks later, the Zodiac would strike again. October 11th, 1969. In San Francisco, cab driver Paul Stein picked up a fare at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets. His passenger was a white male, early 40s, stocky build, wearing glasses. The ride was supposed to end at Washington and Maple, but for reasons unknown, the cab drove 1 block further to Washington and Cherry Street in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. There, the passenger pulled a gun and shot Paul Stein in the head. This time, the Zodiac wasn't in the shadows. He was in the heart of a city, killing a man in broad daylight and leaving behind a trail of evidence. 3 teenagers in a nearby house saw the murder through their window. They watched as the killer leaned into the cab, wiping down surfaces with a cloth, tearing away a piece of the victim's shirt. Then he calmly walked away. They called police immediately. But in one of the most infamous mistakes in the case, the dispatcher described the suspect as a black male, when in fact, witnesses clearly described a white man. Officers who encountered a man walking calmly away from the scene let him go. Many believe that man was the Zodiac himself. Later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter containing the torn piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Proof beyond question. The Zodiac boasted, "I'm a murderer of the taxi driver. To prove this, here is a piece of his shirt. I'm the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area." And then came his most chilling threat yet. "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." Panic swept San Francisco. Police escorted buses. Parents kept children home. The Zodiac had elevated his terror from secluded lovers' lanes to the heart of the city, and now he was threatening children. By late 1969, the Zodiac was no longer a local story. He was a headline. Newspapers across the country carried his cryptic letters, his taunts to police, and his chilling threats against children. The San Francisco Police Department, the Vallejo Police, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and even the FBI became involved. Yet despite multiple jurisdictions working the case, the killer always seemed one step ahead. Each letter he sent increased his fame and the frustration of detectives who knew they were playing into his hands. He wanted attention, and they couldn't ignore him. But the letters weren't just words. They contained puzzles, strange symbols, codes, and eerie promises of more violence. They were the Zodiac's way of playing a game with the entire state of California. On November 8th, 1969, the Zodiac mailed a new letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was a 340-character cipher, now famously known as the Z340. Like his earlier cipher, it was filled with strange characters, reverse letters, and odd symbols. But unlike the first one, which was cracked within a week, this cipher would remain unsolved for more than half a century. For decades, amateur cryptographers and professional codebreakers alike tried to unlock its message. It wasn't until 2020, 51 years later, that a team of codebreakers finally solved it. The message was chilling, though not revealing of his identity. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death. No name, no identity, just more taunting, more obsession with his bizarre afterlife fantasy." After the murder of cab driver Paul Stein, the Zodiac had, for the first time, been seen clearly by multiple witnesses. Police released a composite sketch, a heavy-set white male, around 35 to 45 years old, glasses, short brown hair. The sketch spread like wildfire across San Francisco. Citizens claimed they saw him everywhere. Police were flooded with tips, but every lead fizzled. Detectives began to focus on suspects, the most famous of whom would become central to Zodiac lore: Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen was a former elementary school teacher from Vallejo. He was intelligent, eccentric, and deeply unsettling. He lived near the first two crime scenes. He was ambidextrous, potentially explaining why the Zodiac's handwriting was inconsistent. He liked ciphers and codes, and he was known to carry knives. Most damning of all, on the day of the Lake Berryessa attack, Allen had told friends he was going to Lake Berryessa to watch the girls. Shortly after, he came home with bloody clothes, claiming he had killed a chicken. Police searched his trailer and found disturbing items: sexual devices, firearms, and tapes of young children. He wore a Zodiac brand watch, which bore the same crosshair symbol used by the killer. Everything seemed to point to Allen. But then came the problem: evidence. Handwriting experts compared Allen's writing to the Zodiac's letters. It didn't match. His fingerprints didn't match those found in Paul Stein's cab. His DNA, when tested decades later, didn't match the saliva from stamps on Zodiac's letters. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992, officially never charged. To this day, some believe he was the Zodiac. Others argue he was just a perfect red herring. Allen wasn't the only name floated. Over the years, hundreds of suspects emerged. Rick Marshall, a projectionist who lived near San Francisco and had a love of old films and codes. His handwriting seemed similar, but evidence was thin. Lawrence Kane, a man with memory problems after a brain injury, who lived near one of the victims. Some survivors tentatively identified him, but inconsistencies weakened the case. Richard Gaikowski, a journalist whose radical writings matched the Zodiac's tone. Some believed his voice matched the recorded Zodiac call, though no physical evidence linked him. Earl Van Best Jr., accused decades later in a book written by his son, claiming striking similarities between his father and the Zodiac sketch. But the theory relied heavily on circumstantial claims. The list went on and on. Some suspects looked promising for a moment, then fell apart under scrutiny. The truth was, the Zodiac could have been almost anyone. A neighbor, a teacher, a stranger walking past you in a grocery store. And that was the most terrifying thing. He blended in. Through 1970 and 1971, the Zodiac continued sending letters, some as long as 13 pages. He mocked police, claiming they would never catch me because I've been too clever for them. He drew diagrams of bombs, threatening to blow up school buses. He included bizarre references to pop culture, such as quotes from The Mikado, a comic opera. Each letter stoked more fear, more headlines. California was obsessed. Citizens were terrified, and yet, the Zodiac seemed to vanish and reappear at will. Some letters were confirmed authentic. Others, authorities debated. Was it all the same man, or had copycats begun to feed the legend? By 1974, the Zodiac's letters had slowed down. His last confirmed message arrived that year, referencing The Exorcist film and mocking it as the best satirical comedy. After that, silence. The murders, the letters, the phone calls, all stopped. Some believed he had been arrested for another crime. Others thought he had died. Or perhaps, he had simply grown tired of the game. But the fear he created never left. California was forever scarred by the shadow of the Zodiac. By the mid-1970s, the Zodiac had all but disappeared. His last confirmed letter arrived in 1974, mocking the film The Exorcist. He dismissed it as the best satirical comedy I have ever seen. And then, nothing. For decades, no more confirmed letters arrived. No more confirmed murders were tied to him. For the public, it seemed as if the Zodiac had simply walked away from his reign of terror. But detectives knew better. The silence didn't mean he was gone. It meant one of two things. Either the Zodiac had died, or he had decided to stop writing while continuing to live his life as an ordinary man among ordinary people. The thought was chilling. He could have been a neighbor, a co-worker, even someone reading the very newspapers that once carried his own taunts. Officially, the Zodiac is linked to 5 murders and 2 attempted murders between 1968 and 1969. But the truth is murkier. Some investigators believe the Zodiac may have been responsible for far more killings. Police in Riverside, California, suspected he may have murdered a young college student named Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, 2 years before his first confirmed attack. On October 30th of that year, Sherry was brutally stabbed near the library at Riverside City College. A typewritten letter was later sent to police and newspapers, signed The Confession, boasting of the murder. Years later, a Zodiac connection was suggested but never proven. Other unsolved cases in Northern California, stabbings, shootings, missing persons, have been speculated to bear the hallmarks of the Zodiac. But without hard evidence, those claims remain theories, whispers in the dark. What we know for certain is that he enjoyed the guessing game. He wanted the world to wonder how many victims truly belonged to him. The Zodiac changed the way Californians live their lives. Parents warned their children not to ride buses. Couples thought twice before parking on lovers' lanes. San Francisco police officers began patrolling schools, bracing for the day the Zodiac might follow through on his threats. His ability to manipulate the media and, through them, the entire public, made him unique. He wasn't content to kill in silence. He needed the world to see him, fear him, and talk about him. In doing so, he became one of the earliest examples of the modern celebrity serial killer. His image, his symbol, his words, they outlasted his crimes. For law enforcement, the Zodiac case became an obsession. Investigators like Dave Toschi of the San Francisco Police Department devoted years of their careers to chasing leads that went nowhere. Toschi himself would later inspire pop culture detectives, including the fictional Inspector Harry Callahan in Dirty Harry. But for Toschi, there was no Hollywood ending. The case haunted him until his death in 2018, never solved, never put to rest. The files grew thicker with each passing year. Thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of interviews. But the face of the Zodiac remained hidden. As time passed, theories about the Zodiac grew wilder. Some believed he had to be a military man, given his use of ciphers and his apparent comfort with weapons. Others argued he was simply an intelligent loner who studied puzzles and read about cryptography in public libraries. There were theories that he was a failed writer, using his letters as a twisted way to see his words published. And of course, the suspects. Every few years, new books and documentaries emerged pointing the finger at someone new. Was it Arthur Lee Allen, the disturbing teacher whose life seemed to mirror the case, but lacked forensic proof? Was it Richard Gaikowski, the radical journalist with the strange writings and ties to San Francisco? Or was it someone else entirely, a man whose name we'll never know, who blended so seamlessly into society that he died without ever being suspected? Each theory added more mystery, more speculation, but never closure. By the 2000s, the Zodiac case entered a new era. Advancements in DNA analysis brought hope. Police carefully examined the stamps and envelopes used to mail Zodiac's letters, extracting small samples of saliva. In 2002, partial DNA profiles were created, but none matched any of the prime suspects. In 2018, the capture of the Golden State Killer through genetic genealogy sparked new hope. If DNA could bring down one of California's most notorious cold cases, maybe it could solve the Zodiac too. Detectives began exploring genetic genealogy for Zodiac samples. But contamination, degraded evidence, and inconclusive results have kept the case unsolved. As of today, the mystery remains. The Zodiac's crosshair symbol is one of the most infamous icons in American crime. It has been reproduced endlessly in books, films, and documentaries. Hollywood turned his story into films like Zodiac, 2007, directed by David Fincher, meticulously recreating the crimes and the obsession of investigators. His ciphers continue to fascinate online communities of amateur codebreakers, each hoping to be the one who finally cracks his puzzles. And in the true crime world, his name stands alongside Jack the Ripper as one of the great mysteries. Killers who taunted society and vanished without ever being caught. So who is the Zodiac? A failed teacher? A lonely journalist? A stranger no one suspected? We may never know. The case files remain open, the DNA samples remain tested and retested, and the theories multiply each year. But perhaps that was the Zodiac's true victory. Not just the murders, not just the fear, but the legend. He ensured that his name, the name he gave himself, would outlive him. To this day, more than 50 years later, people still whisper about the Zodiac. His ciphers still taunt us. His letters still chill us. And his shadow still stretches over California, a ghost of a man who should have been caught, but never was. On one of his earliest letters, the Zodiac wrote, "Man is the most dangerous animal of all." It was a quote he stole from A Most Dangerous Game, a short story about a man who hunts other men for sport. For California, and for the world, those words became prophecy. The Zodiac hunted not just people, but an entire society's peace of mind. And in that sense, he succeeded, because we are still here, more than half a century later, asking the same question. Who was the Zodiac Killer?